Well, hello and welcome to the No Filter Needed podcast, where we cut the fluff, expel those myths, and kick unobtainable standards to the curb. I am your host, Camilla Collins, self-image consultant, author, and founder of multiple beauty and creative entertainment agencies. I am super passionate about empowering people to change their self-perception and reimagine not just the beauty, but the huge amount of power within themselves. And this podcast is in support of my mission to do just that. Well, hello. So I have got the super lovely Zoe Aston in today. And Zoe is a psychotherapist and mental health consultant. And she is also the creator of Your Mental Health Workouts. We go back a long time, since I thought it was younger, but was it about 10 years old?
No, I think you were right. I think it was a bit younger. I think because you were at my 10th birthday party. So I think we probably met at like 8.
About 8.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. And you were literally the next street up from me, weren't you? And so, we lost touch for a while, and then we bumped into each other again.
Yeah.
Around sort of the age of 21.
Yeah.
And then we've, been keeping in touch ever since. And you contributed to my book, which it was amazing, and I'm so thankful for. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to have been asked.
Right, so in the book, I mainly sort of asked you about the nature versus nurture kind of argument, and we sort of touched a bit on addiction, around other kind of things. But I mean, I think addiction is kind of quite a big one, especially with sort of the way people are living their lives today, and sort of social media, I guess, being quite addictive. Like, what's your kind of view on addiction, and do you think it's the amount of people that I guess are showing addictive tendencies, or suffering from addiction and the other things that it kind of leads on to, do you think that's kind of increased these days?
I think it probably has. I mean, addiction is one of those things that you can probably apply to everyone at some point in their lives, but it's also the only self-diagnosing disease. No one can say you're addicted to something unless you say you're addicted to it, because only you really know why you're doing something. And there's a theory called the self-medication hypothesis, which is basically that we use things in order to self-medicate our feelings and help us cope with things. And if that's your definition of addiction, then we're all doing stuff all the time to help us cope and help us kind of medicate and make us feel better about ourselves. I suppose the increase with things like the increase of what we might call addiction with things like social media is that it's become so readily available, whereas several decades ago it would have been drugs and alcohol, maybe food. There was the stuff we got addicted to was about ingesting something toxic, whereas now there are so many different types of what we call process addictions available to us that's very easy to get hooked on things like social media, or obsessions around eating, or obsessions around your body, obsessions around people, and we call them process addictions because they're not things that you have to actually ingest or drink or eat in order to get a high from. You actually get off on your own chemicals, so you're using your body's natural biochemistry to get a hit ultimately, which is where things that we like love addiction, sex addiction, codependency come in, because you find something that just gives you that little hit. But what makes it an addiction is that there's a chase and a ritual and a kind of instant gratification to it, but it has to be causing damage ultimately. There's also a detrimental consequence to it in the long run. What are the kind of damages that are sort of coming out of the more modern day addictions that you're seeing, rather than, I mean, it probably does even sort of excessive social media use, and sort of addiction there can then lead obviously to like unrest, which will then turn to alcohol or food and things like that. But like, what would you say are sort of the main things that are kind of coming out of that, and how it's displaying in people? I think there's a lot more people having a lot more problems with relationships. My practice is full of people struggling with relationships, mainly young people, millennials or Gen Z, that have been part of the sort of online dating experience. I think that's become a thing. There isn't any actual empirical evidence to prove that anxiety disorders have increased, but I think we certainly talk about them more, and I think they come to the surface younger, potentially. I do think there is more conversation around low self-esteem issues. Again, there's no actual evidence to show that there's been an increase in low self-esteem, but I think the movement around mental health and talking around mental health and understanding that self-esteem is a mental health thing or a mental well-being thing, or however you want to phrase it, has just allowed people to open up that conversation a little bit more.
It's great that people are talking, and I always think the more things are out in the open, it's easier for people to express themselves and to accept it, and think, oh, okay, there's other people like me. But do you maybe worry slightly that perhaps people are, the more it's being talked about, the more it's even being pushed out on social media as well, in a way, and coming up in conversations, do you think that's actually making people really sort of hone in on it and kind of breed more of this anxiety and more of this uncomfort and sort of mental health worries? Or even people that didn't necessarily have it, might have had just having a bad day, sort of then blow it out into proportion and have this whole thing about it and sort of a label to it.
Yeah, I think the labelling thing is really interesting, because sometimes it's a real relief to be like, oh, that's a thing. Like, other people have that when you see a program or a post and you're like, oh my God, that's a thing.
Me too.
Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. It's got a name. Thank God for that. I'm not weird. That means that there are other people out there who are struggling with the same kind of thoughts and feelings. For example, someone with intrusive thoughts may not have something like full-blown OCD or panic disorder, but just hearing the words intrusive thoughts for someone who's had them but not been able to label them for years maybe, it's such a release of, oh, that's a thing. Those intrusive thoughts are intrusive thoughts. Everyone has intrusive thoughts to an extent, but some people have them more than others. So I think there is a danger of things like mental health or bad mental health becoming sort of currency in young people, who's sicker than who, but hopefully that will evolve into a more recovered or a more recovery-based conversation. Whenever there's a new trend or whenever there's a new conversation happening, people tend to jump on the bandwagon, and, it's just social behaviour. And then usually what happens is it just curves a corner. And, I think social media is probably going to do the same thing. I think at some point there's going to be a change and we'll all sort of stop using it, because there'll be something that goes on that in society that guides us to just back off and move back into our sort of private lives a little bit. So social media is almost like the macro of what happens in smaller social groups. So if you look at the social media behaviour, what you'll see is that happens on a much smaller level in all the different, what we'd call cohorts, social group. So yeah, I think sometimes the labelling is really, really helpful. The labels are really, really helpful. But again, with mental health, if you're not sort of diagnosably unwell, so for example, if you've got a diagnosis of anorexia or schizophrenia, this doesn't necessarily apply to you, but if you are walking around your life every day not being aware of your mental health or your mental well-being, that's a problem. We all are constantly bombarded with images and information around our physical health, and we also all have mental health. So I do think it's a bit like the feminist movement. I think we have to really over-egg it, and I'm always over-egging the stuff around mental health because not enough people are doing it, in my opinion, at the moment. And the more I say it, the more likely it is that people are going to hear it and respond to it. So I do think we need to overdo it a little bit and then kind of come back to baseline. That happens with movements all over the place. There needs to be a big shove in order for it to have an impact.
And then to sort of rein it in back and go, right, let's deal with this kind of sensibly in a way. And it's great. So your account is mainly your mental health workout. It started as an Instagram account, didn't it?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you've used that platform, but I guess that's where everybody is, isn't it? And I don't know how you feel, perhaps a little like me, where I do think social media is great in a way that it brings people together. It's wonderful for businesses to reach out to people, but again, it's just got a bit too much. I feel with just so many users and so many messages and mixed messages and as it's bringing people together, it's dividing them apart. Just like you said, where I feel they can go into little pockets of, I mean, there's loads and loads and loads of different groups as opposed to sort of like 10 groups. There's like, you know, millions of different sort of groups that you can kind of fit into.
Yeah.
And people kind of moulding themselves to that, and then perhaps like wallowing in maybe not such great stuff in a way within those groups. But how have you found it sort of building the account kind of on Instagram? I know you've had an amazing response and you're helping a lot of people, and I can see kind of all the comments, but have you even had struggles yourself with not spending, obviously you want to help people, so I'm sure it can be tempting for you to kind of be there on all the time, but you're just sort of keeping boundaries around your time on it and also the stuff that you're seeing.
I think I was a bit of a sort of an Instagram snob a year ago or so, because
in what way?
Well, people always said to me, you don't use Instagram for work, and I was like, oh no, therapists don't use Instagram, it's all confidential, like you can't do that. But actually when I looked into it and became familiar with the sort of therapy mental health community on Instagram in particular, I don't really use any other social media platform, I was like, actually this is a really good way of using a very helpful platform consciously and well. I do think social media has contributed to a massive spike in negative stuff, bullying, body image, comparisons, you know, all the stuff around filters, which I struggle with myself. I try not to use filters on my stories, but, you know, it's that, because I think it goes against everything that I promote, but it's they're just there, and
they're so easily accessible, right?
And people that I follow are using filters, and I'm like, oh, you know, they look really, I'm like, you don't look like that in real life, you know. So the stuff, I think that kind of stuff can be quite challenging, but I think using a platform like that, which has access to so many people in a helpful way, as long as you are, I'll speak about myself, but as long as I'm in a place where I can navigate myself and navigate my own thoughts and feelings around it and my own behaviour around it, I do think it's a very useful tool in order to expand an audience and get information out there. For some people, that's the only resource that they have, which is part of the reason why I do it, because lots of people don't have access to therapy in the same way that I had access to therapy. It's just not an option. And if someone's got a specific question and I know the answer and it's theory, it's not me therapizing them, I'm really happy to give that information. So yeah, I mean, what I do is I don't give myself a hard time if I can't get back to someone. I don't make promises to, you know, my followers, so that there isn't a sort of an opportunity for them to be let down, because it can be quite demanding. I mean, it's when I first started doing it, I was like, this is a full-time job in itself. You don't realize quite how much effort goes into a social media account like your mental health workout until you're actually doing it.
I had like I just know from running like accounts in general and watching you grow, I was like, how is she doing this?
Yeah, well, it was all interaction basically.
It's madness. Yeah. I just thought, are you even sleeping? Are you even having any time? And because it's so easy to get, especially doing what you're doing, because you want to help people, and it was the audience was so engaged and really kind of soaking up everything and wanting to know more. I just wondered if that kind of taken you up a little bit, because were you expecting that response?
No, not at all. I mean, I think I can get a bit swept up if the audience is increasing very quickly, but at the end of the day, it's just ego.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, it's just ego. We've all got egos. We all need egos. That's another conversation.
Yeah.
And I think it's all right that I get swept up in it a little bit, as long as I know how to get myself out of it. It's a bit like we go back to the addiction stuff. You know, lots of the things that people get addicted to are really fun to engage in, as long as you know what you're doing with it, as long as you can like do it safely within your own personal limitations and boundaries. And that can be different day to day. So there'll be some days I'm like, I just cannot be on Instagram today. But part of being a therapist is about helping people to feel relaxed and interactive and being able to communicate and offer them information that they may not have had, or ways of thinking that they may not have access to without that. And the whole mental health workout thing is basically an encapsulation of what I would do in therapy with a client over a long period of time, which is ultimately, let me teach you how to look after yourself.
Which is great. Yeah. I mean, I just think it's like I'm a fan of the gym and you know, even spin classes and all of that kind of beforehand, and because you've got a community at the gym, you know, and your walkouts are part of your your workouts are part of your routine, and you know that's just so important to all of us, just to kind of have that routine in place. I think all human beings need it really. Your mental health really, I believe a lot of the physical kind of ailments and things that sort of come up probably started somewhere sort of mentally really, apart from viruses and stuff like that, or you know other things that are out of control. But that's why I think it's just so important to take care of it, which is why it's great that you're doing what you're doing, because is there many accounts like it out there?
Well, I haven't found an account that mirrors exactly what I'm doing. I mean, there are lots of mental health accounts. I think the gap that I saw was that there wasn't anyone sharing information about the sort of myth busting stuff and the bits that we don't really talk about. So it's a bit like self-love. You know, the self-love craze is that you have to love yourself before someone else is going to love you, or you can love someone else. And I sit there and I'm like, if you need to outsource love for a little bit, go for it. Like if you have never had a role model that taught you how to love yourself, and you need to seek that outside of yourself for a bit so that you can learn how to love yourself, then that's fine. Like we all need love coming in from outside sources. If you're completely reliant on yourself for self-love, you're living a life of isolation. So the self-love movement is great, and lots of the stuff that it brings into people's consciousness is a nice way of thinking. But ultimately we don't always have intricacies of how that works. So I think chucking in a little bit of theory and explaining some of the things that would happen in the therapy room and giving that information, not keeping it secluded to behind four walls in a confidential space, is what makes it different. But generally speaking, it's a very natural evolution of the knowledge and skills that I've gained over the past 10 years, that I just want to make sure that other people have access to it in the same way.
Also just having someone that knows what they're talking about up there, you know, that would be the one kind of worry, because it's so noisy out there now. You have so many influencers across, like, from influencing everything, from products and services and whatnot. It's actually really hard to work out kind of who the pro is, and that's, I think, one of my, I guess, big worries in a way, is where people are getting their information from, and if it's the right information, and particularly around issues concerning mental health. I mean, that's a bit of a worry. What do you feel like the long-term kind of, or rather just negative impacts of not just social media but digital media? So I remember a time when there wasn't Facebook, and you know, was playing outside a lot as a kid, but the sort of the younger generation, I mean, even babies are like straight sort of on iPads, and it is the way that the world's going, which is great in a way of the opportunities and things, but on sort of a mental health kind of thing, and human beings and our brain and what we're supposed to, the way we're supposed to absorb information, like how do you think that impacts us?
I think there's quite an argument around it. I think the first side of the argument that came up was that it's really bad for mental health and people shouldn't be on screens as much, and they're isolating and they're not communicating and they're not learning to have boundaries, and they're not experiencing emotions, and therefore they're not able to tolerate emotions, so they become very sensitive, and then, you know, you get the sort of snowflake type, not criticism's not the word I'm looking for, but the sort of, people have referred to millennials as like the snowflake generation, because so much of what we've grown up with has been different to what the generations before have grown up with. However, having said that, I would say the digital age is actually the first age that we have such a platform to express ourselves to so many people and be challenged by other belief systems and be vocal about particular values, particular morals. And there's some really young, Greta is one of them, really young people who have managed to get their voice heard in a way that would never have happened before the digital age. So, you know, there is an argument that it's not great for human relationships, but there's also an argument that actually people now get to choose who they communicate with.
Do you think that it encourages codependency with these sort of likes and follows, and anyone, I mean, obviously it's instant gratification as well, sort of dopamine hits, but how about like the codependency? I guess that's your sort of area.
I see more things around perfectionism and screen addiction and eating disorders that are aggravated by social media more so than codependency. However, you could argue that those things are the ways that we deal with the pain of codependency, which is not feeling good enough.
It's all a big circle, isn't it?
It's all a big circle,
you know,
and
and from one thing to the other, kind of, and it all comes out in all different ways, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, I'd probably like to dig into that a little bit deeper, because I hadn't really thought about how codependency and social media interact in that direct a way. Because I suppose I'd always thought about it as a screen addiction or a social media addiction.
I just think so many people are building brand new relationships with people that they haven't met, more so, and it's become so normalized as well. So I just wonder if that's almost like the digital codependency, or it could be going that way, because I feel like the digital reality is now. Sorry, the digital. Well, you see, already I'm doing it. It's more real. People spend more time in the digital world than they do out in real life sometimes, whether it's for work, and not everybody, but that's kind of the way it's going. And you wonder if it's going to actually sort of go that way, and we're going to have actually a lot of new digital related. I'm not even making sense. I'm like,
I mean, maybe that might become a thing, a digital disorder. That could be. I mean, maybe we've just diagnosed a whole load of people.
wow.
I suppose I've got quite an old school understanding of codependency, in that it is born out of trauma. So, I mean, if you were using social media, Instagram, Facebook, and in a trauma response, or having a trauma response to it, or being really triggered by it, then yes, you could classify it as codependence. It just doesn't feel, the link doesn't feel clear to me right now. But, you know,
to look into.
Yeah, definitely, because of the codependent research and the model that I use in particular to work with codependency was developed long before any of this was happening. So you never know, maybe there's another research strand in there for me.
What's your what have you kind of noticed about people's body image and self-image over the last sort of few years, I guess, in comparison to the years before?
I suppose I've definitely noticed that people are more forthcoming in talking about coming forward with eating disorders and getting treatment for eating disorders, in terms which ties in with the body image stuff. And I've worked more with people who experience what we call body dysmorphia on the extreme end of the scale. Everyone has two things: their actual body reality, what their body actually looks like, and what their body image is. And the body image, the way I usually like to explain it, is that it's something that's created in your brain. It's just created by your mind. It's made out of thoughts and feelings. It's not made out of what's actually going on. So depending on what you're thinking and feeling, depending on what you're experiencing, your body image is going to change. Our body reality doesn't change that much on a daily basis, but everyone in fact in the world has different feelings about their body and their face on a daily basis, and that's normally based on how they're feeling, not a reality.
I totally get that, actually, and I've even noticed, like, from one day to the next, like, I've woken up either like going, oh my god, like I look great, I look like I look slimmer, my skin looks better, like, it literally overnight, and you just think, what on earth was kind of going on yesterday? This isn't sort of reality. And it proved to me, and I always try, when I get these little moments of like little aha moments, to just kind of remember, because it proves to me how much it's in my mind as well, like a lot of this, what I'm portraying on the outside, or when I look in the mirror, what I'm putting on myself, if that makes sense, on my reflection.
And that's a really normal behaviour. It's a really normal human behaviour to do. I think the problem is when we get attached to those thoughts and feelings. So when there's a big difference between your body image and your body reality, you have to find ways of bringing them closer together. And that's when the bigger the gap, the more extreme the behaviour. But it's about, the recovery is always about working on your thoughts and feelings and understanding that part of yourself. And naturally your body image and your body reality will become more in tune with each other. And having said that, I go back to what I was saying a minute ago, which is it's very normal to have difficult thoughts and feelings about your face and your body and the way that you look. I suppose my own experience around that is that I don't attach to them anymore. You know, I'll have a thought or I'll have a feeling about my body or the way my face looks, but it doesn't change how I treat myself. It doesn't change what I eat. It doesn't change, you know, I might wash my hair to make myself feel a bit better, or maybe I'll put on tinted moisturizer that day, but it doesn't fundamentally change what I think other people think of me or what I think of me.
And that's like really smart, especially when it kind of changes so often, like our moods and, you know, things, outside events happen to us which can change how we feel sort of all the time. And it's, I think, when we latch onto these things and then start changing all the great stuff that does work for us, i.e. You know, our routines and things like that, that's when we get in a bit of a muddle. And I think I would say, in my experience, your internal image and your external image, the further away they are from each other is the more uncomfortable I think you will be. And I just think it's so important for people to really work on kind of matching those up. I mean, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I talk from personal experience that I actually this year, I'll give you a real life story. I was at the doctor. I don't really weigh myself, but for various reasons I've been to the doctor a couple of times and they've had to weigh me. And although within those times I will have felt that I got heavier or I got lighter or whatever it was, I weighed exactly the same. And it just showed me, I was like, that's, you know, it doesn't matter what I think I'm doing to control my body weight or shape or more accurately control my feelings. Actually, if I eat normally, my weight stays exactly the same, even though I feel like it might go up or go down. It's not true, because it just, as an average, it comes back to exactly what it was several months ago.
And we all have that kind of weight anyway that our body sort of just settles down to, doesn't it? Unless we're doing something crazy drastic. But even if we have like a, you know, proper pig out session and not so, it just comes back to like that equilibrium.
It's called your set point weight. And it's just, everyone has one, and it's just where your weight settles in order for your body to function the way it needs to function. And I think particularly for people who've had body image issues or eating disorders, that's a really difficult thing to get your head around, trusting that your body will settle at the weight it needs to be at, and that weight might not be the one that you want. And that's where the work is.
You know, our bodies are just amazing things, and they kind of do a lot on their own, so we really ought to not fuss with them.
Yeah, but same with our minds.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm doing group work, you know, someone will become very upset, or someone will be angry with someone else, or there'll be a feeling that's uncomfortable. People don't like conflict, so say there's conflict. And I know from experience that if I leave it alone, they will self-regulate. But the general sort of, we live in a society that just wants to make it okay again. And I always say to them, like, just leave it. Like, they will self-regulate. They will figure that out. You know, our minds and our bodies have a way of bringing us back to what we call homeostasis. So they're always trying to find balance.
So true.
And if you're off balance for a long time, then we get into sort of stress and that conversation about stress. But ultimately, if you are a relatively healthy person in body and mind, your body and mind will find you back at a point of balance. Doesn't matter what you do.
So reassuring.
Yeah.
It's so reassuring to kind of hear from you as well, to hear that. But I always just know, like, tomorrow's a new day. And sometimes I've gone, today's a write-off, and I've literally got up the next morning, like, the previous day didn't happen, or bouncing out of bed, and you just kind of never know. Like, it's never really that bad, is it? It just
it's like, you know, it's okay, tomorrow just needs to be a little bit better than today, kind of thing. But I also, you know, it doesn't have to be very often now, but it did actually happen to me recently. Sometimes I can feel very low in the mornings, and I've a couple of times in the recent past I've like just gone back to bed and then got up and restarted the day.
Like a reset. I find sleep is a reset. And I have naps in the afternoon if I can't, like literally 15-20 minutes, and it totally, I mean, I wrote this in the book as well, like it's just a reset. It completely transformed me, and I'm like, what was I in such a state about earlier? Might have been emails or work or something, but it's suddenly very clear.
Exactly. So that's your body just going, okay, you need to have a nap. And then while you're sleeping,
time out.
your biochemistry rebalances, and then you wake up and you're able to continue with it. And everyone will have their way of doing that. For some people it's napping. I'm not really a napper myself, but something like movement for me really works, whether it's a walk or whether it's high intensity or whether it's yoga, or, you know, something like that really works, as does, you know, taking time out, sitting on the couch, having a hot drink, I find that often I'll have a hot drink thing. For me, that really is like it's a phrase my mother used to use, put your feathers down.
I like that.
Give yourself a moment to put your feathers down. And also, you know, I'm also someone who's vulnerable to feeling like I need to respond to things immediately. And I've learned over and over and over again that no one is ever in as much a hurry as I am. Like, no one needs to hear back from me as quickly as I think they need to hear back from me.
I'm the same, and there's that. We because we have our own worlds, don't we, as well? And we think, obviously we're the centre of our worlds, but we're not the centre of everybody else's. But also another thing on that note for me is that I worry that I'm not. If I don't deal with it now, I'm going to forget, or it's other stuff might come up. Yeah.
See, I think I worry that I'm going to get missed out or forgotten, or I won't get what I want. But it's interesting that different people, that's where you get other people, your history coming in and kind of playing the story. It's interesting because I'm posting on triggers at the moment, and I was doing something about, I haven't posted it yet, but it's something about dealing with a trigger is actually when you're able to tolerate the feelings and change the ending. It's not about removing it from your life, and I think that's kind of what we're talking about a little bit in terms of social media and body image and food and addiction.
It's that understanding and acceptance, isn't it, in a way of what triggers are and how they're playing out in today, and where their root is, where they kind of come from.
And not using it as an excuse to bow out of something, because we're all triggered all the time, is the truth of it. There's all sorts of things going on all the time that trigger us, consciously and unconsciously. We're reactive beings, and we're all trying to be a little bit more mindful and a little bit more active rather than reactive, and all that's part of I think the wellness movement, which is great, because we're all learning to tolerate what I'd refer to as our trauma responses a little bit better, I suppose, in a healthier way.
Awesome. Oh, well, it's been absolutely amazing chatting to you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming in. It's been awesome. Okay, great. So remind me of the tag if anyone wants to go and check your mental health workout, because I don't want to spell it wrong.
Well, that's it. It's just at your mental health workout.
Lovely. So there's no underscores or anything.
No underscores, straightforward.
At your mental health workout.
Yeah.
Super. Amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you got some good takeaways from today. And if so, then please do leave a review. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And you can find further insights and tools over at CamillaCollins.com.